Hi, everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and I just want to let you know that we are still recording on Zoom, obviously, and I just want to thank everybody at BCTV who is doing the support work behind all of these shows, and they're working real hard. They've got a lot of things coming up, graduations and all kinds of summer activities. So a big shout out to Cor and Brian and Nolan and Helena at BCTV. So thanks for joining us today. And our guest today is JoEllen Tarallo. JoEllen has followed a path as an educator that brings together public health, research, education, and policy in a powerful and practical way. She's currently the executive director of the Center for Health and Learning here in town, whose focus is on improving school and community health. JoEllen is also a biker, a gardener, a downhill skier who also teaches adaptive skiing, and she loves to cook. So welcome today, JoEllen, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very honored to be a guest.
It's great to have you on, and we're going to find out a bunch about what you do and what you're doing now. You grew up on Long Island, I believe, but you were born in Boston, grew up on Long Island, is that right?
Well, actually, all four of my grandparents immigrated to the United States from Italy. Three of them from southern Italy, one of them from northern Italy. And they all ended up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which has traditionally been and continues to be a place where immigrants end up. And from there, my family spread out over the next generation to towns surrounding Boston. My parents were actually the only ones that left the Boston area and went down to Long Island. My dad was thinking about becoming a fledgling apprentice plumber, and Long Island was growing, and it seemed to be a good place for them.
Yeah. And so you grew up with a big influence with your grandparents then.
Yeah, in fact, in preparing for this interview, you asked me to think about some of the big influences growing up. And I have to say, being a second generation, of immigrants really was very, very formative in my life. We had a very, very strong culture around family and kept our ties very closely with family in the Boston area. And just the values of sort of the American dream in the 50s. And I'll date myself now. My parents were first generation. They didn't speak much Italian unless the relatives got together because they wanted to assimilate. That was top on their list. And they were very much, blue collar, aspiring Americans from immigrant families. In fact, my grandfather always looked back and said he would have done better, quote unquote, if he had stayed in Italy where his family owned vineyards.
Yeah. Have you ever gone back?
I've been back twice, and I had the blessing of meeting one of my grandfather's 11 siblings who lived down in Calabria in Catanzaro, which is on the heel of the boot. And we were able to meet her. She was 93. So I was so glad to be able to do that. And then more recently, I went to Italy with my partner, and we spent 3 weeks going to various places, including Sicily, where two of my grandparents are buried in the graveyard there.
Wow, that's so great. I mean, what wonderful connections.
Yeah, and when I got off the train in Sicily, the local police were checking passports, which it was the only time we had experienced that. And when they looked at my name, Tarallo, they said, "Oh, your family's from Malili." And that was the first time in my life I had ever had that feeling of, oh my goodness, what a connection to a place.
That's a great story. That's really wonderful. And speaking of siblings, so you're one of three, but your sisters are quite a bit older than you.
Yes, my sisters were 7 and 8 years older than me. My parents had taken in a foster baby of some very close friends whose daughter needed some support. And they took her for the baby for a few weeks and ended up being 9 months. And they got very attached. And so after they had to return the baby to the mom, they decided to have another child. And so that was me. So I really felt very lucky in my family to be, really brought in very intentionally. And that was sort of part of the constellation around me from the very beginning.
Growing up, you did some dancing, you played the flute a little bit. And when you got to middle school, it kind of, from what we talked the other day, you had a little bit of early advocacy experience.
Yes, it's interesting that my interest in policy and politics was there very early on. Well, my father was very, very active in the Democratic Party, and so he would take me out leafleting when I was very young. But really, it was about the cultivation of democratic principles, and I grew to appreciate just our system and the fact that you could be active and influence it. And from a very early age, I just had the personality and the interest. I was in student government and ran for student. I look back now and I think about, making signs and putting them up. I'm really not there now, Right. But back then I did, and I was my student government president, class president at one point. Recently we had Earth Day, and I thought, reflected back that my girlfriend and I organized the very first Earth Day celebration in our high school. And I was very strongly encouraged as a girl to be a teacher, be in education, but all my family had many educators. My sisters were teachers. I ended up pursuing teaching, but then because of my love of policy and systems, I started moving into more administration and coordination of programs and that kind of thing. So that's a little background there. So after almost 12 years or so in the central and northern Vermont, I ended up doing a master's degree at UVM and got my health education focus and community health focus there. And then from there, I actually applied during the Ethiopian famine. Now I'm really going to date myself. In 87,
Yep.
You might remember Bob Geldof and We Are the World.
Yep.
And SIT was looking for volunteers to go overseas. And I was at a junction finishing my master's where I could do it.
Yeah.
And I left my job in administration of continuing ed programs at UVM, and they allowed me to go over as a volunteer. And then I wrote a grant that was funded through the United Nations High Commission for Refugees to do health education in the field and the refugee camps. It was one of the most formative ever experiences of my life, my way of thinking. Appreciation for every moment and everything that we have in life, including running water, really the basics.
Yes.
We arrived. It was in 86, actually, that we arrived, and they were just setting up the camps. I mean, hundreds of thousands of refugees from Ethiopia, and it's still happening now in Ethiopia right now. It's kind of painful to watch. We're migrating over the western border, the eastern border of Sudan, and the International Rescue Committee, which was started in the 1930s after World War I by Albert Einstein to support refugees. They have been doing that work, and they tend to go where often where nobody else will go. They provide medical relief services, and so. It was a big eye. It was very, very hard. While I was in Sudan, I met a colleague who had just graduated from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, And he had gotten his master's. I said, oh, I've always thought of getting my doctorate. And he said, well, you should apply to Harvard from here because they like candidates who do unique things. And here you are, right? It's Stanford. I typed up my application in a little mud tuple on one of those old-fashioned little typewriters. And back then, I think, how did I get it to my parents? And they submitted it for me. I know, they were, as I said, first-generation immigrants. When I said to them I wanted to apply to Harvard, they thought I was nuts. But they helped me, and I ended up going to do my doctorate at Harvard Graduate School of Education.
You actually were on the founders board of the Brattleboro AIDS Project.
Right. So I landed back after that 1 year in Cambridge working on my first year of my graduate work. I came back and I saw in the newspaper that a group of people was meeting to discuss serving the needs of people with HIV in Brattleboro.
Yes.
And I was actually pursuing a job that had been funded by the Centers for Disease Control with the Agency of Education to do HIV health education work. And those two came together. I attended this meeting and was one of the founding members of the Brattleboro AIDS Project, which since became the Southern Vermont AIDS Project.
Right. So this was mid-80s?
Oh, it was, at that point, it was 88, and it was absolutely at the emergence of the AIDS epidemic. And people were not touching people with AIDS. We did not know. There was so much education to be done.
So much to be done. So you must have been right on the ground floor of doing that kind of research and trying to.
I was. What was the book and the band played on?
The band played on.
That was published, giving the history of the AIDS epidemic. And so we started seeking out some of our wonderful Shirley Squire's son, Ron.
Yes.
Shirley lives in Guilford, and Shirley has gone on to raise like $40,000 or more every year through the AIDS Walk in Brattleboro.
Yes.
And her son Ron and I became quite good friends, and he was our state representative. And then Steve Fox was another local person, and they were the first to step forward and say, I have HIV. And we did education in the community. They would come as a person with AIDS, and, they'd walk in the room and I'd give them a hug because we wanted to demonstrate it was safe and okay.
It was a very powerful time. I remember Fritz Hewitt as well was involved with that at the beginning. Yeah, it was incredible. And everybody was flying blind to a certain degree. So I'm sure that you folks were scrambling, to figure out how to handle this. And it's amazing.
There was enough public health science coming down the pike at that point that we had enough to use for our education and outreach.
Right.
Similar right now to the COVID epidemic, it's just the science has to filter down and then out to build the confidence of people. And it doesn't happen overnight.
You've talked about how you work at the crossroads of health and education, and that has come up several times. And this is certainly a prime example of that in your work, coming together like that. The Center for Health and Learning, which you are now the executive director of, is kind of remarkable. I know that a lot of people know about it. I didn't know a lot of the things that you folks do, but you're serving, this is one statistic, you're serving more than 20,000 professional and community members over the course of the time that you've been doing this. You have so many available workshops and trainings for professionals and people in the community. And I love it. You have a phrase you use that as executive director, you like to make nonprofits more nimble.
Well, I think nonprofits can be nimble, and that's why they are perfect partners to state initiatives that come out of federal funding and state funding. And states have huge amounts of constraints, human resources constraints, And when state agencies partner with nonprofits, it creates a synergy for reach and cross-sector work and creating partnerships that, can't happen if we're working alone or the agency is working alone.
Yes, right.
And that includes work with lots of other kinds of partners as well.
Well, I was looking through your list of, I was looking through the list of the people and organizations that you have partnered with. It is a very long list indeed. I mean, it's over 50, and I'm sure this is not complete, but it's everything from the Brattleboro Retreat and High School to Gun Sense Vermont, Healthcare and Rehabilitation Services, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Veterans Affairs, Developmental and Mental Health Services, Children and Families, Department of Corrections, Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living. It goes on and on. So you are creating these relationships that I would assume are very big, as you say, become more dynamic when you've got a public and a private people working together. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how the synergy of that may, does that promote more change? Does it make it happen more quickly? What's it like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's an incredible privilege when you read those, and I think about the people that stand behind those names, and people come and go. So, you interact with so many people. And actually, without those partners, we couldn't do the work that we do. I mean, we just couldn't. Everything we do is in partnership pretty much. And I'm proud to say that actually we're going somewhere between 35 to 40,000 Vermonters who have participated in our trainings over the last, I think it's 17 years. So that's a lot of impact. Yeah. And if you hope and think that for everybody you impact, there may be a little ripple effect.
That's right.
So, I think we are not a direct service organization. We work with systems. Again, there you go, my interest in systems and, impacting. We impact the people that do the direct service work that makes a difference to people every day. Mm-hmm. And if we can leverage their ability to do that in partnership with resources and, directives, ideas, plans that come to us from various sources, then we're fulfilling our mission, basically. Mm-hmm. Address health priorities across sectors with many partners.
What part of the job do you like best?
Oh, probably, be able to think out of the box and to take action on things. I also have really valued working with so many extraordinary people as staff and consultants. Mm-hmm. And, a mentor of mine in the early stages of my work as a nonprofit director said to me that one of the best things for her was the ability to create good jobs for quite a few people. Mm-hmm. And in Brattleboro, we started from scratch. I mean, we started from the belly up. And when you do that, you're creating resources and synergy. And as you build your capacity, you have to hire more people. Right. And in order to retain people, you have to offer benefits and salaries that are competitive, or people will not stay. And we're in the process, even right now, of doing a position and salary benchmarking effort to, try and do that. But I've worked with extraordinary people, sometimes under challenging conditions of funding streams. And for a small nonprofit, you have to create all your own infrastructure. It's not like working for a school system where there are some limitations, that there is some infrastructure, and I know depending on the size and scale, but a university or a state agency, there's lots of infrastructure built in.
Now, with all of the data-driven information that you accrue, that you explore, that you try to implement, how do you turn that into a message where you can feel the heart beating underneath those things?
Oh, what a great question, Wendy. It's so funny because just this morning, one of my colleagues up at Department of Health she's a health policy analyst, and she is overseeing a group that I actually helped create, the Suicide Prevention Data Work Group. And I said to her, originally it was called the Data and Surveillance Work Group. Now, surveillance may have a negative connotation because people think of it as monitoring, but actually surveillance means investigative. You're trying to understand. It's not just that you're exchanging data and collecting it. You're trying to make sense of it.
Yes.
And I think that the real issue is that behind every data point is a person.
Yeah. Excellent.
That is the heartbeat.
Yeah. Right.
And I can say that what motivates us in our suicide prevention work is that behind it all are people who, for whatever reason, chose to take their own life, and families left behind who are making sense of that.
Yes, right.
And those people, though you've never met them, they become part of your own family. So there is a level of caring that you put together with the data, and that creates the need to collect more data to understand better.
Right.
You know, and data takes many forms, like, interviewing people and just being able to tease out what are the factors here and how do we understand this better so we can put better strategies in place.
Yes. And, Brattleboro as a community, I think, is working really hard in so many different ways on that, especially the suicide prevention piece for kids or for teens, for youth. In relation to Brattleboro itself, to our community, how do you see this in the place of community and how we're dealing with it, and your input as well?
Well, I think we need to move what's called upstream to get ahead of the point at which people have crises, to lay the foundation in community for keeping kids engaged and productively engaged. I never expected to think about this, but the Boys and Girls Club in town, our family went through a very, very challenging period at one point, and I was working full time. And we just moved to Brattleboro, and my son was young. And if it were not for the Boys and Girls Club that year, I'm not sure how we would have managed. He was able to go there after school every day. I knew he was safe and productive. He was engaged. That's moving upstream. Right. And so we need lots of those kinds of services and activities and community supports because it's challenging being a family in this day and age.
Yeah, many challenges that have never appeared before. I know that there's someone who's starting to work on a project that hasn't gelled yet, but the premise of the project in Brattleboro is the things that kids need emotionally in order to have a healthy life, community-wise, meaning things like music programs and NECA and New England Youth Theater and Yellow Barn Music and Sandglass Theater, all of these things that work to support these other parts of kids to help them to develop and to express themselves. So I think that's going to be a very exciting project. So I think it's things like that Brattleboro is real good at, creating new ideas and implementing them.
Yes, and I think municipalities in town government and working very closely with nonprofit. And I do want to point out that I think all of the organizations you noted are nonprofit organizations, which is the third sector. There's your governmental sector, your business sector, corporate sector, and your third sector is nonprofit. It actually accounts for a lot of employment and activities and services. But the things that you named, music, art, theater, those are what we call protective factors for kids. And finding out what are the protective factors, what's going to drive that kid's interest. Right.
And to be able to get support.
And to get them plugged in, I wish I had taken more advantage and my son has said, I wish we had taken more advantage of the Career Center, for example. Because that is where he would find his, charge, so to speak.
Right. Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's very important to build those protective factors.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way of putting it. Protective factors is good. You've done a lot with the Guilford Church in Guilford. You worked with the youth group there.
I did the Brattleboro Area Interfaith Youth Group, known as the BAIYG. That's what attracted me to the church, because my children were of age and they were able to participate in trips to Kenya, where they have a sister town where that they've supported the building and development of a high school and 40 children with parents who are orphaned by AIDS, and have supported them over decades now.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And I was able to participate in the effort to develop and establish relationship with an organization named Simply Smiles that works in the Cheyenne River Reservation with the Lakota community in La Plante, one of the poorest communities in America.
Yeah.
And we were able to go over 5 summers, and the youth spend a week. Well, they spend all year fundraising, and then that's a protective factor in and of itself, connecting with the community. And then spend a week. They've planned a camp for the kids on the reservation. And so groups rotate in and out and spend the whole week running the camp. And direct interaction with the kids. And so I really had the distinct honor of participating in those activities.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. One last thing I'd like to ask you about your experience of this last year. I'm sure it's been a challenge in many different ways. And in your field and mental health, how has it been for you?
It's been enormously challenging. We work with professionals across sectors in education, healthcare, mental health, social services, law enforcement, first responders, faith leader. We work with people who provide support to other people. And so providing them support and trying to connect with them even this year has been challenging. And then all of your communications and systems this year were turned upside down while we went virtual. And I myself am a little burnt out on 40 or 50-hour Zoom meetings. I am very relieved we're being able to get out now and start doing some face-to-face connection with people, human beings.
Human beings, that's right. Yes, I'm sure it's been strenuous and exhausting for everybody who is in any kind of a service organization.
And the silver linings have been that the government has provided support, which have allowed us to carry on our payroll and our employment, to bridge the gaps between granting funding sources. And the silver lining has been learning the new technology to take everything that used to require hours of time driving.
Right.
Now do in virtual format. So it's been really, in the long run, challenging and a big opportunity.
Yes. And it sounds like you've risen to the occasion and you're still here, and changes a lot of those changes will probably stay in place too. So JoEllen, thank you so much.
Oh, Wendy, thank you for the opportunity. And I stand among the many colleagues in this community and neighbors and friends that you've interviewed to thank you for what you've done to bring so much shared wisdom to the community. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for those words. They're very kind words. I appreciate it. We will see you around town, and it was wonderful to have you on the show. Really appreciate you coming on.
You bet. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, JoEllen. And thanks to all of you again for joining with us for our weekly show. Here we are. We will be back again next week. Stay tuned. There's always bound to be somebody you know who's coming on the show. So thanks again.